I was halfway down Eagle Ridge Trail on my Snowmachine when I saw Patricia Henderson standing right in the middle of the path like she owned the place, her puffy pink parka making her look like an angry marshmallow against the pristine Montana snow. She had her hand raised like a traffic cop, and behind her stood two men in matching neon yellow vests that said, HOA Security in bold black letters. Vincent Dalton, you stop that machine right now. Patricia's shrill voice cut through the crisp winter air, somehow piercing through my helmet and the rumble of my engine. I throttled down and brought my ski due to a halt about 15 feet from where she stood, snow kicking up around the skis. This was the third time this month Patricia had tried to stop me from using this trail, and honestly, I was getting tired of it. Eagle Ridge Trail was a beautiful stretch of wilderness that wound through the mountains just outside of Whitefish, Montana, connecting my property to the vast network of snowmobile trails that made this area a winter paradise. What's the problem now, Patricia? I killed the engine and pulled off my helmet, the cold January air immediately biting at my ears. The problem is that you are trespassing on community property. She marched toward me, her boots crunching in the snow with each aggressive step. This trail runs through the Eagle Ridge HOA boundaries, and you do not have permission to use it. I took a deep breath, watching the vapor cloud hang in the air between us. Patricia Henderson had been the president of the Eagle Ridge Homeowners Association for 3 years, and in that time, she had made it her personal mission to control every single aspect of life in our mountain community. She sent violation notices for Christmas lights being the wrong shade of white, for mailboxes being 2 inches too tall, and once even tried to fine someone for having a woodpile that was aesthetically displeasing. Patricia, we've been over this. I've been using this trail for 15 years, long before your HOA even existed. That's irrelevant. She had reached me now, her face red from either the cold or anger, probably both. The Eagle Ridge HOA was established in 2019, and our bylaws clearly state that all trails within our boundaries are for the exclusive use of HOA members in good standing. You, Mr. Dalton, are not a member because your property is outside our development. One of the security guys stepped forward, a tall man with a thick beard and an apologetic look in his eyes. Madam, maybe we should just let him through this time and handle it through proper channels. Absolutely not, Derek, Patricia whirled on him. If we let people break the rules, then what's the point of having rules at all? I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. Look, Patricia, I need to get home. It's getting dark and this is the quickest route back to my cabin. Should have thought of that before you decided to trespass, she said, crossing her arms. Now, you can either turn that machine around and take the long way around via County Road 219, or we will be forced to confiscate it. Confiscate it? I couldn't help but laugh. You can't be serious. I am deadly serious. Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our HOA bylaws gives us the right to seize any property being used in violation of community rules. She pulled out her phone, the screen bright against the darkening sky. I have the sheriff's department on speed dial, and I'm sure they'd be very interested in your continued harassment of our community. The second security guard, younger and clearly uncomfortable, shifted his weight. Mr. Dalton, maybe it would be easier to just go around this time. The county road isn't that much longer. He was trying to help, but I was done being pushed around. No, I'm going through. You want to call the sheriff, Patricia? Go ahead. I'd love to explain to them how you're blocking a public trail. Public trail. Patricia's voice went up an octave. This is private property. HOA property. Actually, it's not. I pulled out my own phone, fingers numbing quickly in the cold as I pulled up a photo I'd taken last week. See this trail marker, Montana State Trail Designation 847B. This is part of the state trail system. Patricia barely glanced at my screen. That marker is ancient and means nothing. This land belongs to the Eagle Ridge Development, which means it belongs to the HOA. We were at an impasse, and the temperature was dropping fast. The sun had already dipped behind the western peaks, and the twilight was fading quickly. I needed to get home, not stand here arguing with Patricia Henderson about property rights. "I'm going through," I said, putting my helmet back on. "Derek, Timothy, stop him," Patricia commanded. The two security guards looked at each other, clearly not thrilled with the order, but they moved to block the trail anyway. Derek, the bearded one, held up his hands. "Sir, please don't make this difficult. Just turn around." "I'm not turning around. This is ridiculous." I started the engine, the roar echoing off the surrounding pine trees. "If you move that machine 1 inch, we will consider it stolen property operating on HOA land, and we will confiscate it under our authority." Patricia was practically screaming now, her voice carrying across the snow-covered landscape. "You can't confiscate my snow machine, Patricia. You don't have that authority." "Section 12, paragraph 4, she shouted again like it was some kind of magic spell. "Derek, get the truck. We're taking this machine back to the HOA storage facility." "Madam, I don't think we should," Derek started, but Patricia cut him off. "That's an order. Either you do your job or I'll find someone who will." I sat there on my snow machine, completely stunned. This couldn't actually be happening. HOAs could be petty and annoying, but seizing someone's property, that had to be illegal. "Patricia, if you touch my machine, I will press charges." "Go ahead and try," she said, pulling out her phone again. "I'm documenting everything." "You've been warned multiple times about trespassing, and now you're refusing to comply with a lawful order from the HOA. This is all perfectly legal." Derek had jogged back down the trail toward where they'd apparently parked their truck, and I could hear an engine starting. This was actually happening. They were actually going to try to take my snow machine. I had two choices: try to gun it past them and risk someone getting hurt, or let them take it and fight this through legal channels. The smart part of my brain knew I should just let them take it and call my lawyer, but the angry part of my brain wanted to blow past Patricia and leave her standing in a cloud of snow. The smart part won barely. "Fine," I said, killing the engine again. "Take it. But you're going to regret this, Patricia." "The only person who's going to regret anything is you, Mr. Dalton," she said, triumphant. "Maybe this will finally teach you to respect community rules." A large Ford pickup came rumbling up the trail, a flatbed trailer attached to the back. Derek hopped out, still looking uncomfortable about the whole situation. "Sir, if you could just step away from the machine, we'll load it up." I climbed off my ski-doo, my legs stiff from sitting in the cold for so long. "You guys know this is wrong, right?" Timothy, the younger guard, wouldn't meet my eyes. Derek just shook his head slightly, like he was trying to apologize without Patricia seeing. It took them about 10 minutes to load my snow machine onto the trailer, using ramps and tie-downs they'd clearly brought specifically for this purpose. Patricia supervised the entire operation, barking orders and taking photos with her phone. "There," she said once it was secured. "Mr. Dalton, you can retrieve your property once you've paid the appropriate fines and signed an agreement not to trespass on HOA property again." "How much are these fines?" I asked, though I already knew I wasn't paying a cent. Patricia consulted her phone. "Let's see. Trespassing violation, that's $500. Refusal to comply with HOA directive, another $500. Equipment storage fee, $100 per day. And filing fees, $200. So $1,300 to start, plus $100 per day until you comply. You're insane." I'm enforcing community standards, she corrected. Something you clearly know nothing about. Now I suggest you start walking before it gets completely dark. County Road 219 will take you back toward town, and from there, you can figure out how to get home. She actually smiled at me. Patricia Henderson smiled as she told me to walk 5 miles in the dark through Montana winter cold because she'd just stolen my snow machine. This isn't over, I said. You're absolutely right. It's not over until you pay your fines and learn your place. She gestured to Derek. Let's go. I watched them drive away, my snow machine strapped to their trailer, until the red taillights disappeared around a bend in the trail. Then I was alone in the quickly darkening forest, with nothing but my anger to keep me warm. The walk back to my cabin took almost 3 hours. I followed Eagle Ridge Trail down to where it intersected with County Road 219, then trudged along the shoulder of the rural highway until I could cut across to my property. By the time I saw the lights of my cabin, my feet were numb. My hands were cramping from being shoved in my pockets for so long, and I was angrier than I'd been in years. My cabin sat on 40 acres of mountain property that I'd bought back in 2008, long before anyone had thought to develop this area. It was a beautiful piece of land, with a mix of pine forest and open meadows, and it backed right up to the national forest. The cabin itself was modest but comfortable. 2 bedrooms with a loft, a big stone fireplace, and huge windows that looked out over the valley below. I got inside, cranked up the heat, and immediately called my lawyer. Marcus Reeves had been handling legal issues for me for about 10 years, ever since a property line dispute with a different neighbor. He was good at what he did, thorough and aggressive when he needed to be. Vincent, what's wrong? Marcus answered on the second ring, probably recognizing my number. The Eagle Ridge HOA just seized my snow machine. There was a pause. They did what? I explained the whole situation while I made coffee, needing the warmth and the caffeine. Marcus listened without interrupting, and I could hear him typing notes on his computer. Okay, he said when I finished. First thing tomorrow morning, I'm filing for a temporary restraining order and demanding immediate return of your property. This is theft, plain and simple. HOAs don't have the legal authority to seize personal property, regardless of what their bylaws say. That's what I thought. Second, I need you to send me everything you have about that trail. You mentioned it's a state trail. Yeah, Trail 847B. It's been part of the state system since at least 2005, maybe longer. Good. If it's a designated state trail, then it's subject to public easement laws, which means the HOA can't restrict access to it even if it crosses their property. Marcus paused. But Vincent, you said something that concerns me. You said you've been using this trail for 15 years, at least. I moved here in 2008 and the trail was already established, and your property backs up to it. Yeah, my northern boundary line runs right along the trail. More typing. Vincent, have you ever actually surveyed your property? Like had a professional survey done? When I bought it, yeah. Why? Do you still have that survey? Somewhere in my files. Marcus, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that if you've been using that trail since 2008, and it runs along your property line, we should make absolutely sure where that property line actually is. Sometimes old surveys aren't accurate, especially in mountain terrain. And if there's any chance that trail actually crosses your property, even partially, then the HOA doesn't have a leg to stand on. I felt a spark of something, not quite hope but close to it. You think the trail might be on my land? I think it's worth checking. Let me make some calls tomorrow. In the meantime, find that survey and scan it to me. Also, any other documents you have related to your property purchase, especially the deed and title insurance paperwork. We talked for a few more minutes about next steps, and then I spent the next 2 hours digging through file boxes in my spare bedroom/office. I finally found the survey from 2008, a large format document that showed my 40 acres with boundary lines and landmarks marked. I spread it out on my kitchen table and studied it carefully. My property was roughly rectangular, running about a quarter mile east to west and a third of a mile north to south. The northern boundary was marked as following existing trail and tree line, which was pretty vague but not uncommon for rural properties. The western and southern boundaries were clearly marked with GPS coordinates and reference to section corners. The eastern boundary followed a creek bed. I took photos of the survey with my phone and emailed them to Marcus, then sat back with my coffee and thought about Patricia Henderson and her smug smile. If that trail was on my property, even partially, I was going to make sure she knew it. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with anger and possibilities. At 7 in the morning, I called Marcus again. "I'm already on it," he said before I could speak. "I've got a surveyor lined up for tomorrow morning, and I'm filing the paperwork for the restraining order today. The courthouse opens at 8, and I'll be there at 8:01. What about getting my snow machine back? That's part of the restraining order. Judge Morrison is on duty today, and she doesn't have much patience for HOA overreach. If everything goes smoothly, you could have your machine back by this afternoon. And if it doesn't go smoothly, then we file criminal charges for theft and let the sheriff's department sort it out. Either way, Vincent, you're getting your property back." I spent the morning taking care of things around the cabin that I'd been neglecting, trying to keep busy while I waited for news. Around 11, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Vincent Dalton?" A woman's voice, professional and clipped. "Yes." "This is Sharon Vance from the Eagle Ridge HOA board. I'm calling about your snow machine." "Not Patricia. Interesting. What about it?" "I understand there was an incident yesterday involving your vehicle and our community trails. I wanted to reach out personally to see if we could resolve this matter amicably." "Amicably? Your president stole my snow machine and tried to charge me over $1,000 in fines. Mr. Dalton, I assure you, the HOA was simply enforcing our community rules. However, I've reviewed the situation, and I believe there may have been some miscommunication. If you're willing to meet with me and Patricia to discuss this, I'm sure we can come to an understanding." I almost laughed. "Let me guess. My lawyer filed for a restraining order, and now you're worried about the legal consequences." There was a slight pause. "Mr. Dalton, I'm simply trying to facilitate a peaceful resolution that benefits everyone involved. Here's my peaceful resolution. Return my property immediately, apologize, and stay out of my way. Otherwise, I'll see you in court. Mr. Dalton, please be reasonable." I hung up. 2 minutes later, Marcus called. "Did you just get a call from someone named Sharon Vance?" "How did you know?" "Because she just called me too. The HOA is in damage control mode. Judge Morrison granted the temporary restraining order about an hour ago, and the HOA has until 5 p.m. today to return your snow machine or face contempt charges. They're trying to make this go away quietly." "Good. Let them squirm." "Vincent, there's something else. I had a paralegal do some preliminary research on that trail while we wait for the surveyor. According to Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks records, Trail 847B was established in 1998 as part of a recreational easement program. The easement was granted by the original property owner, a company called Mountain Vista Development Corporation. Okay, what does that mean? It means the trail existed long before the Eagle Ridge HOA development. It also means there's a legal easement for public use. But here's the interesting part. The easement documentation references several property parcels, and one of them has a legal description that matches your property. My heart started beating faster. So the trail might actually be on my land. The easement might cross your land, yes. But easements are tricky. Even if the trail crosses your property, the public easement might still give people the right to use it. What we need to determine is whether you own the land underneath the easement, and whether the easement was properly transferred when you bought the property. This is getting complicated. Property law usually is. But don't worry, we'll figure it out. The surveyor tomorrow will give us definitive boundary lines, and then we can compare those to the easement documentation and the HOA's claimed territory. Just sit tight and let me handle the legal side. At 3 p.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Patricia Henderson, and she sounded furious. "I hope you're proud of yourself, Mr. Dalton. You've made a complete fool of me in front of the entire HOA board. Patricia, you stole my snow machine. What did you think was going to happen?" "I did not steal anything. I was enforcing community rules, which is my job as HOA president. But apparently, you'd rather run to a lawyer and waste everyone's time and money instead of being a reasonable adult," says the woman who seized my property over a trail dispute. "That trail belongs to the HOA. It runs through our development, and we have every right to control who uses it. Actually, Patricia, you don't. It's a state-designated trail with a public easement, but I'm sure your lawyer has explained that to you by now." There was a sharp intake of breath. "You can pick up your machine at the HOA clubhouse at 4:30. And Mr. Dalton, this isn't over. Not by a long shot." She hung up before I could respond. I drove my truck to the Eagle Ridge development, a sprawling collection of luxury mountain homes that had been built starting in 2019. The houses were all massive, 5,000 or 6,000 square feet minimum, with manicured lawns that must have cost a fortune to maintain in Montana winters. The HOA clubhouse was at the entrance to the development, a building that looked more like a resort hotel than a community center. Patricia was waiting in the parking lot with Derek and Timothy, my snow machine already unloaded from the trailer. She had her arms crossed and her mouth set in a tight line. "Here's your property, Mr. Dalton," she said coldly as I got out of my truck. "I trust you're satisfied." "I'll be satisfied when you stay out of my way and stop harassing me about that trail. The trail issue is not resolved. The HOA will be seeking a permanent injunction to prevent you from using community property." I walked past her to inspect my snow machine, checking for any damage. Everything looked fine, though they'd clearly gone through it, probably looking for registration issues or violations they could cite. "You do what you need to do, Patricia. So will I." As I started loading the ski-doo onto my truck's bed using the ramps I'd brought, Derek approached me quietly. "Hey man, I'm sorry about yesterday. I tried to tell her it was a bad idea, but she doesn't listen." "Not your fault," I said, securing the first tie down. "You were just doing your job." "Yeah, well, it's a stupid job sometimes." He glanced back at Patricia, who was on her phone, probably complaining to someone. For what it's worth, a lot of people in the development use that trail. It's been there forever. Most folks don't even know the HOA claims to own it. The HOA doesn't own it. It's a public easement. That's what I figured, but good luck explaining that to Patricia. Once she gets an idea in her head, there's no changing her mind. I finished securing the snow machine and thanked Derek for his help. As I drove away, I could see Patricia still on her phone, gesturing angrily. I had a feeling this was just the beginning of a much longer fight. The next morning, a truck with Precision Land Surveying painted on the side pulled up to my cabin at exactly 8 a.m. Two men got out, one older with gray hair and a weathered face, the other young, maybe mid-20s. "Vincent Dalton?" the older man asked, extending a hand. "I'm Tom Richards, and this is my associate, Kyle. Marcus Reeves hired us to do a boundary survey of your property. Thanks for coming on such short notice." Marcus mentioned it was somewhat urgent. He also said there's a specific focus on your northern boundary line. I led them inside and showed them the 2008 survey on my kitchen table. Tom studied it carefully, taking photos with his phone and making notes on a tablet. "This is a good survey, pretty thorough for the time. But you're right to want it updated. The equipment we have now is significantly more accurate, and we can pin down boundaries to within inches rather than feet." He traced a finger along the northern line. "This notation here, existing trail and tree line, that's what we call a meets and bounds description. It's legal, but it's vague. We'll be able to establish exactly where that boundary is using modern GPS and ground markers." "How long will this take?" "For 40 acres with one boundary of concern, probably most of the day. We'll shoot all 4 corners, verify the other boundaries, and then do a detailed survey of the northern line. We'll also map the trail itself to see how it relates to your property line." They spent the rest of the day working, and I spent it watching them and trying not to get my hopes up. Tom and Kyle used equipment that looked like it belonged on a science fiction movie set, devices on tripods that sent out laser beams, GPS units with antennas, and stakes with bright pink flagging. Around 4 in the afternoon, Tom knocked on my door. "Vincent, you're going to want to see this." My stomach did a flip. "What did you find?" "Come on, I'll show you." I followed Tom and Kyle out to the northern edge of my property, where Eagle Ridge Trail ran through the forest. They'd planted stakes every 50 feet or so along the boundary, each one marked with pink flagging. "Okay," Tom said, pulling out his tablet. "So your northern boundary line runs along here," he pointed to the stakes, "and the trail runs along here." He gestured to the obvious path through the snow. "They looked like the same line to me." "Tom, I don't understand. Are they the same?" "Not exactly. The trail and your boundary line overlap in some places, but in most places the trail is actually on your property." I stared at him. "What?" "Your property line, the legal boundary based on the original deed and survey, is actually about 20 to 30 feet north of the trail in most places. The trail itself, the entire visible path, is on your land." "The entire trail?" "Well, the section we surveyed, which is about a half-mile stretch running east to west along this side of your property." "Yes, it's all on your land." Tom pulled up a map on his tablet, showing colored lines overlaid on a satellite image. "See, the blue line here is your property boundary based on the original GPS coordinates from your deed. The red line is the trail as it exists now. They run roughly parallel, but the trail is definitely south of the boundary, which means it's inside your property. But the 2008 survey said the boundary followed the trail. That's the problem with meets and bounds descriptions. The surveyor in 2008 probably assumed the trail was the boundary because it was the most obvious landmark. But when you actually run the legal coordinates, the true boundary is north of the trail. Your property is bigger than you thought." I felt like the ground had shifted under my feet. So when Patricia Henderson claimed the trail was on HOA property, she was wrong, at least for this section. "I can't speak to other parts of the trail, but this half-mile stretch, it's definitely yours. Can you document this? Like officially?" "That's what we're here for. I'll have a full survey report ready in 3 days with maps, coordinates, photos, the whole package. It'll be a legal document that you can use in court if necessary." I called Marcus immediately. "The trail is on my property, the whole thing." "Are you certain?" The surveyor just confirmed it. Tom Richards, the guy you hired. He's got GPS coordinates, maps, everything. My property line is north of the trail, not along it. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him thinking. Vincent, do you understand what this means? That Patricia Henderson has been threatening me about trespassing on my own property. That's part of it. But it also means that the public easement for the trail. That easement is on your land. You're the property owner who granted the easement, or rather, the previous owner granted it, and it transferred to you with the property. Which means you have certain rights regarding how the easement is used and maintained. What kind of rights? That's what I need to research. Easements are complex, and recreational easements especially so. But at minimum, you have the right to be notified of any changes to the easement, and you may have the right to limit certain uses if they damage your property. I need to see the original easement documentation to be sure. But the HOA definitely can't seize my snow machine for using a trail on my own property, right? Definitely not. In fact, they've committed theft and possibly criminal trespass. Vincent, I think we need to pivot from defense to offense here. I'm going to draft a letter to the HOA demanding a formal apology, compensation for your time and legal fees, and a permanent cease and desist regarding any claims about the trail. Do it. And Vincent, don't tell anyone about the survey results yet. Let me get the official report from Tom, and let me do some more research on the easement. We want to have all our ammunition ready before we fire. That was the hardest part, keeping quiet. For 3 days, I went about my business, avoiding the trail and the HOA, while Marcus and Tom worked on documenting everything. Patricia called twice more, leaving voicemails about HOA board meetings and mediation sessions, but I ignored her. On the 4th day, Tom delivered the survey report. It was a 50-page bound document with maps, photographs, legal descriptions, and certifications. The conclusion was clear. My northern property boundary extended beyond Eagle Ridge Trail, and approximately 0.6 miles of the trail ran entirely within my property. Marcus called an hour after I sent him the report. Vincent, I've been researching the easement, and I have good news and complicated news. Give me the good news first. The easement was granted in 1998 by Mountain Vista Development Corporation, which owned a large tract of land that was later subdivided. Your 40 acres was part of that tract. When you bought the property in 2008, the easement transferred to you as the new owner, which is standard. The easement allows for public recreational use of the trail, including snowmobiling, hiking, and cross-country skiing. And the complicated news: the easement is perpetual, meaning you can't revoke it or close the trail. However, as the underlying property owner, you have significant rights. You have the right to maintain the trail, to set reasonable rules for its use, and most importantly, you have the right to prevent non-recreational use of the easement. You also have the right to prevent any changes to the trail without your consent. So I can't kick people off the trail, but I can control how it's used. Essentially, yes. And here's where it gets interesting for your dispute with the HOA. They don't own the easement, and they don't own the land under the easement. They have no legal authority over the trail whatsoever. When they seized your snow machine for using the trail, they were not only committing theft, they were fraudulently claiming authority they don't possess. Can we sue them? We can, and we probably should. But first, let's give them a chance to make this right. I'm going to send a letter to the HOA board, with copies to Patricia Henderson personally, Sharon Vance, and their attorney if they have one. The letter will lay out the facts, demand an apology and compensation, and put them on notice that any further interference with your use of the trail will result in legal action. What kind of compensation? I'm thinking $5,000. That covers your legal fees, the survey costs, and damages for the illegal seizure of your property. It's enough to hurt, but not enough to force them into a protracted legal battle. And if they refuse, then we file suit in district court for theft, fraud, and harassment. We'll also file a complaint with the Montana HOA Oversight Board, which can impose fines and sanctions. And depending on how vindictive you want to be, we could press criminal charges against Patricia Henderson personally for theft. I thought about Patricia's smug face when she'd ordered Derek and Timothy to take my snow machine. I thought about the 3-hour walk in the freezing dark. I thought about the threats and the fines and the sheer arrogance of her assumption that she could control public land. Let's start with the letter. But Marcus, if they don't respond appropriately, I want to go after them with everything we've got. Understood? Marcus sent the letter via certified mail and email on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. The first call was from Sharon Vance, the HOA board member who tried to mediate before. Mr. Dalton, I've received Mr. Reeves' letter, and I'd like to discuss it with you before things escalate further. I'm listening. The board is prepared to issue a formal apology for the incident with your snow machine. We acknowledge that there may have been some confusion about property boundaries and easement rights. May have been some confusion. Sharon, your president stole my property and tried to extort me for over $1,000 based on a completely fraudulent claim of authority. That's not confusion. That's theft and fraud. Mr. Dalton, please. I understand you're upset, but let's try to find a reasonable solution here. The HOA is willing to reimburse your legal fees and survey costs. We can cut you a check today. The demand letter asked for $5,000, not just reimbursement. Yes. Well, the board feels that's excessive. We're prepared to offer $3,000 as a gesture of goodwill. Sharon, I don't think you understand the situation. That trail is on my property. Mine. Every inch that runs along the northern edge of my land belongs to me. The public has an easement to use it, but I'm the underlying owner. Your HOA has zero authority over it. Mr. Dalton, the HOA development includes that trail in its common areas. We've maintained it, cleared snow, posted signs, without my permission. On my property, which makes every sign you've posted an act of trespass and every restriction you've tried to enforce fraudulent. There was a long silence. What exactly do you want, Mr. Dalton? I want what the letter asks for. $5,000, a formal written apology from the HOA board and Patricia Henderson personally, and a permanent acknowledgement that the trail is private property with a public easement, and the HOA has no authority over it whatsoever. I'll need to discuss this with the board. You do that. You have until Friday to respond, or my lawyer files suit. The second call came an hour later from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Dalton, this is Gregory Morse. I'm an attorney representing the Eagle Ridge Homeowners Association. Finally got smart enough to hire a lawyer, did you? Mr. Dalton, I've reviewed the situation, and I've advised my clients that they have a strong legal position here. The trail in question has been used as an HOA amenity for 5 years, and the doctrine of adverse possession may apply. I almost laughed. Mr. Morse, adverse possession requires continuous use for at least 5 years without the owner's permission, and it requires the claimant to pay property taxes on the disputed land. Has your client been paying property taxes on my land? That's not the only factor, it's a required factor in Montana. Also, there's a recorded public easement on the trail, which means it can't be claimed through adverse possession anyway. Did you actually research this before you called, Or are you just trying to intimidate me? There was a pause. Mr. Dalton, I'm trying to prevent an expensive and unnecessary lawsuit. My clients made an error in judgment, and they're willing to make reasonable amends. But your demand for $5,000 is excessive, and the request for a formal acknowledgement of your property rights could create complications for the HOA's management of the development. That sounds like a problem for your clients, not for me. Mr. Dalton, be reasonable. Let's settle this for $3,000 and a mutual non-disparagement agreement. Everyone walks away, no hard feelings. No, $5,000 written apology, acknowledgement of property rights. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. I'll consult with my clients. He hung up and I immediately called Marcus. They've lawyered up. Guy named Gregory Morse. I know Greg. He does a lot of HOA work in the area. He's competent but tends to rely on bluster and intimidation. He tried the adverse possession angle. Marcus laughed. That's not going to work, and he knows it. He's fishing, trying to see if you know your rights. The fact that you called him on it means he'll go back to his clients and tell them they're in trouble. They offered $3,000 and a non-disparagement agreement. Of course they did. They want to keep this quiet because if other people in the development find out that the HOA has been making fraudulent claims about the trail, there could be a revolt. HOAs survive on the perception of authority. Take that away, and the whole thing falls apart. So what happens now? Now we wait. My guess is they'll come back with a counter-offer closer to our demand. They want this to go away, but they want to save face. Give them until Friday like we said. Friday came, and at 4 p.m., Gregory Morse called back. Mr. Dalton, my clients are prepared to settle this matter. They'll pay $4,000, issue a written apology, and acknowledge that the trail easement is on your property. However, they want assurance that you won't interfere with HOA members' use of the trail. I have no intention of interfering with anyone's legal use of the trail under the public easement. But the HOA cannot make or enforce rules about the trail, cannot post signage without my permission, and cannot deny access to anyone for any reason. The easement is public, which means they can't treat it as a private HOA amenity. That's going to cause problems for community management. Again, that's not my problem. Those are my terms. $4,000 is acceptable, but the acknowledgement has to be complete. The HOA must notify all members that the trail is not HOA property, and the HOA has no authority over it. Mr. Dalton, you're asking my clients to essentially admit they've been lying to their members for 5 years. I'm asking your clients to admit the truth. If they've been lying, that's on them. Another pause. I'll need to discuss this with the board. You've got until 5 p.m. After that, my lawyer files suit Monday morning. At 4:58, my phone rang. We accept your terms, Gregory Morse said tersely. I'll have the settlement agreement drafted by Monday. The check will be ready when you sign. Make sure Patricia Henderson's personal apology is part of the package. It will be. He hung up without saying goodbye. Marcus called 5 minutes later. Did Morse call you? They settled. $4,000, written apology and acknowledgement of property rights. Excellent work, Vincent. I'll review the settlement agreement when it comes through and make sure it includes everything we discussed. Marcus, what about the criminal charges? Patricia literally stole my property. We can still pursue those if you want, but I'd advise against it. You've won. You've established your property rights, you've gotten compensation, and you've forced the HOA to back down completely. Pushing for criminal charges would be expensive and time-consuming, and prosecutors are often reluctant to pursue property disputes that have been civilly resolved. But she should face consequences. She has. She's been humiliated in front of her HOA board, forced to admit she was wrong, and she's probably going to face serious questions from HOA members once this gets out. Trust me, Patricia Henderson's reign as HOA president is probably over. He was right, but part of me still wanted to see her arrested. In the end, though, I decided Marcus was right. I'd won. That was enough. The settlement agreement arrived the following Wednesday. It was a dense legal document, but the key points were clear. The HOA acknowledged that Eagle Ridge Trail ran through my private property under a public recreational easement. The HOA had no authority over the trail or its use. The HOA would pay me $4,000 in damages and legal fees, and both the board and Patricia Henderson personally would issue written apologies. I signed it at Marcus's office, and a paralegal handed me a check for $4,000. Attached to the settlement agreement were 2 letters. The first was from the HOA board. Dear Mr. Dalton, the Eagle Ridge Homeowners Association Board of Directors sincerely apologizes for the incident on January 15th, involving the seizure of your personal property. Upon further review and legal consultation, we have determined that our actions were not justified and that we exceeded our authority. We acknowledge that the portion of Eagle Ridge Trail running along the northern boundary of your property is private land with a public recreational easement, and the HOA has no authority over its use or maintenance. We regret any inconvenience or distress this matter has caused you. Sincerely, the Eagle Ridge HOA Board of Directors. The second letter was shorter and clearly written through gritted teeth. Dear Mr. Dalton, I apologize for my role in the incident regarding your Snowmachine and the trail dispute. I acted on incorrect information about the HOA's authority, and I should have verified property boundaries before taking action. I am sorry for the trouble this caused. Patricia Henderson, HOA President. I folded both letters and put them in my pocket. $4,000 and 2 apologies. It wasn't everything I'd wanted, but it was something. There's one more thing, Marcus said, handing me another document. This is a recorded declaration of easement rights. I've filed it with the county recorder's office. It officially documents that you are the underlying property owner for that section of trail, and that the public easement cannot be restricted or modified without your consent. Anyone who does a title search on your property or on the trail easement will see this document. So the HOA can't try this again. They can try, but they'll lose immediately. And if they do try, you'll have grounds for a harassment lawsuit with statutory damages. I shook Marcus's hand. Thanks for everything. Just doing my job. Try not to antagonize any more HOAs, okay? No promises. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the settlement, I was using Eagle Ridge Trail on my Snowmachine, heading into town for supplies, when I came across a group of people standing in the middle of the trail. Not blocking it exactly, but clearly gathered for some kind of meeting. As I got closer, I recognized several faces from the Eagle Ridge development, and in the center of the group was Sharon Vance, the HOA board member who tried to mediate. I stopped my machine and killed the engine. Everything okay? Sharon turned to me and she was smiling. Mr. Dalton, perfect timing. We were actually hoping to talk to you. About what? About the trail. And about the HOA. She gestured to the group around her. These are some of my neighbors from Eagle Ridge. We've been learning about what happened with your property and the trail, and we have some questions. I climbed off my Snowmachine, wary. What kind of questions? A man in his 60s stepped forward, wearing an expensive ski jacket and looking angry. Is it true that the HOA has been lying to us about owning this trail? I don't know what the HOA has told you, but they don't own it. This section of trail runs through my property under a public easement, and they tried to seize your snow machine for using it. This from a younger woman, maybe mid-30s. They did seize it. I had to get a court order to get it back. The group erupted in angry muttering. Sharon held up her hands. Everyone, please. Mr. Dalton, the reason we're here is that once word got out about the settlement, people started asking questions. It turns out the HOA has been charging a mandatory trail maintenance fee to all homeowners for the past 3 years. $75 per year per household. I did the quick math. The Eagle Ridge development had at least 200 homes. That was $15,000 a year. Let me guess, I said. They told everyone the fee was for maintaining HOA-owned trails. Exactly. And now we're finding out the main trail isn't HOA property at all. Some of us are wondering what other lies we've been told. The older man spoke again. I'm Richard Tanner, by the way. I'm on the HOA board, or at least I was until I resigned yesterday. Mr. Dalton, would you be willing to speak at an emergency HOA meeting? We're trying to remove Patricia as president and do a full audit of the HOA's finances and claims. When's the meeting? Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. I know we haven't exactly been friendly to you, but we'd really appreciate your perspective. I thought about it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with the Eagle Ridge HOA and their internal politics. But another part of me, the part that was still angry about that 3-hour walk in the freezing cold, wanted to see Patricia Henderson face the consequences of her actions. I'll be there, I said. The emergency HOA meeting was packed. The clubhouse had seating for maybe 100 people, and there were at least twice that many crammed into the space, with people standing along the walls and sitting on the floor. I arrived at 6:55 and had to push my way through the crowd. Sharon Vance spotted me and waved me over to a reserved seat in the front row. Thanks for coming. This is going to be interesting. At 7 sharp, Richard Tanner called the meeting to order. He was sitting at the front table with 3 other board members. Patricia Henderson was noticeably absent. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on such short notice. As most of you know by now, there have been some concerning revelations about HOA management and certain claims made regarding community amenities. Richard adjusted his reading glasses. Tonight, we're going to address these concerns directly. First, I'd like to invite Mr. Vincent Dalton to speak. Mr. Dalton is the property owner who was involved in the recent trail dispute. I walked to the front of the room, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Public speaking wasn't my favorite thing, but I knew this was important. Thanks for having me. I'll keep this brief. About 3 weeks ago, Patricia Henderson and 2 HOA security guards stopped me while I was using Eagle Ridge Trail on my snow machine. Patricia claimed I was trespassing on HOA property and said I couldn't use the trail without HOA permission. When I refused to leave, she had my snow machine seized and tried to charge me over $1,000 in fines. There were gasps and angry murmurs from the crowd. I hired a lawyer and had my property surveyed. It turns out the trail doesn't run through HOA property at all. It runs through my property, under a public recreational easement that's been in place since 1998. The HOA has no ownership of the trail and no authority over who uses it or how it's maintained. A hand shot up in the audience. But we've been paying trail maintenance fees, I know. And I never authorized any maintenance or improvements to the trail on my property. I'm not saying the HOA didn't do maintenance, but if they did it without permission and without authority. More angry muttering. Richard held up his hands for quiet. Mr. Dalton, can you show us the survey documentation? I'd brought copies, which Marcus had suggested. I handed them to Richard, and he projected them on the screen behind him using the clubhouse's AV system. The maps clearly showed my property line and the trail's location. "As you can see," I said, "the trail is entirely on my land for about 6/10 of a mile. There's a public easement that allows anyone to use it for recreation, but it's not HOA property, and the HOA can't restrict access to it or charge fees for its use." "Where does the trail go after it leaves your property?" someone asked. "It continues east onto National Forest land, and west it crosses under County Road 219 and connects to other state trails. The entire trail system is public, managed by Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks." A woman stood up, furious. "So we've been paying $75 a year for the HOA to maintain a trail they don't even own." Richard cleared his throat. "That's what we're trying to determine." After the settlement with Mr. Dalton became public, several board members, myself included, started asking questions about HOA finances and claims. "We've discovered several irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" This from multiple people at once. "The trail maintenance fees, for one. In the past 3 years, the HOA has collected approximately $45,000 in trail fees. According to our financial records, less than $5,000 has been spent on actual trail maintenance." The room erupted. People were standing, shouting questions, demanding answers. Richard had to bang a gavel several times to restore order. "Where did the rest of the money go?" someone demanded. "That's what the audit will determine, but it appears that much of it was allocated to administrative costs and legal reserves." "Who authorized that?" "Patricia Henderson, as HOA president, has broad discretionary authority over budget allocations under our current bylaws." The questions kept coming, and I sat back down next to Sharon. "This is going to get ugly," she whispered. She was right. For the next 2 hours, the meeting devolved into accusations, demands for resignations, and calls for criminal investigations. It came out that Patricia had also been charging community standards enforcement fees for HOA violations, but none of the money was going to actual community improvements. She'd apparently used HOA funds to renovate the clubhouse office, which she used as a personal workspace, and had been billing the HOA for mileage and meals at rates far exceeding actual expenses. At 9 p.m., the membership voted overwhelmingly to remove Patricia Henderson as HOA president and to place her on the board's suspension list, pending a full forensic audit. They also voted to suspend all HOA fees and assessments until the audit was complete. Richard found me as the meeting was breaking up. "Mr. Dalton, on behalf of the HOA membership, I want to apologize for everything that happened. Patricia was out of control and the board should have reined her in years ago. I appreciate that. I also want to ask about the trail maintenance fees we collected. Since the trail is on your property, do we owe you that money?" I hadn't thought about that. "Talk to my lawyer. But honestly, Richard, I'd rather see that money go to actual trail maintenance or be refunded to the homeowners." "I don't need it." "That's generous of you. We'll make sure it's handled properly." As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: satisfaction. Not just because I'd won the legal fight, but because justice had actually been served. Patricia Henderson had spent years abusing her authority as HOA president, and now she was finally being held accountable. But the story wasn't quite over yet. 3 days later, I got a call from a detective with the Flathead County Sheriff's Office. "Mr. Dalton, this is Detective Lisa Ramirez. I'm investigating a complaint filed by the Eagle Ridge HOA regarding financial irregularities. Your name came up in connection with the investigation, and I was hoping I could ask you some questions." "Sure. What do you need to know? I understand you were involved in a dispute with the HOA regarding a trail on your property. I explained the whole situation again, and Detective Ramirez listened carefully, asking occasional questions. And the HOA paid you $4,000 as part of a settlement. Yes, for damages and legal fees. Did they ever explain where that money came from? No. I assumed it came from the HOA's general funds. Mr. Dalton, I'm going to need copies of all your documentation regarding this matter. The settlement agreement, the survey, communications with the HOA, everything. Can I ask why? I probably shouldn't say too much while the investigation is ongoing, but I'll tell you this. Patricia Henderson has been running the Eagle Ridge HOA like a personal bank account. The $4,000 they paid you, that came from the Trail Maintenance Fund, which was supposed to be restricted for specific use. Using it for a legal settlement is probably embezzlement. My jaw dropped. You're kidding. I wish I was. We're finding evidence of wire fraud, embezzlement, and possibly tax evasion. Miss Henderson has been skimming HOA funds for years, and she covered it up by creating fake expenses and inflating maintenance costs. How much are we talking about? Can't say for sure yet, but preliminary estimates are over $100,000. I spent the next week working with Detective Ramirez, providing documentation and testimony about my interactions with Patricia and the HOA. The investigation expanded rapidly as more homeowners came forward with evidence of financial irregularities and fraudulent fees. 6 weeks after that emergency HOA meeting, Patricia Henderson was arrested at her home in the Eagle Ridge development. The charges included wire fraud, embezzlement, theft by deception, and filing false tax returns. The arrest made the local news, and I watched the footage of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs with a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because she'd finally been held accountable. Sadness because it should never have gotten this far in the first place. The forensic audit eventually revealed that Patricia had embezzled over $130,000 from the HOA over 5 years. She'd created fake vendor accounts, inflated maintenance costs, charged personal expenses to the HOA, and pocketed the trail maintenance fees. The HOA had to hire a crisis management firm to sort out the financial mess and restore member confidence. Patricia's criminal trial took place 8 months later. I was called as a witness to testify about the trail dispute and the settlement. The courtroom was full of Eagle Ridge residents, many of whom had lost thousands of dollars to Patricia's schemes. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Cole, walked me through the timeline of events. Mr. Dalton, when Miss Henderson seized your Snowmachine, did she give you any documentation or receipt? No. She just took it and told me I'd have to pay fines to get it back. And when you retrieved your Snowmachine after obtaining a court order, did you receive any apology or explanation from Miss Henderson? She was angry. She made it clear she thought I was in the wrong and she was just enforcing rules. Even though those rules had no legal basis. Correct. And the HOA later paid you $4,000 as part of a settlement. Did you know at the time that this money was coming from a restricted maintenance fund? No. I assumed it was from general HOA funds. Would you have accepted the settlement if you'd known the money was being taken from a fund meant for trail maintenance? I paused. Probably not. I would have insisted on a different funding source. Patricia's defense attorney, a tired-looking man who'd clearly taken the case because someone had to, tried to argue that Patricia had been acting in good faith to protect the community and that the financial irregularities were accounting errors. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Patricia Henderson was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and its members. She was also barred from ever serving on an HOA board again, though I doubted that would be a problem. The Eagle Ridge HOA underwent a complete restructuring. They hired a professional management company, rewrote their bylaws to include better oversight and financial controls, and refunded the bogus trail maintenance fees to all members. Richard Tanner became the interim president and did a good job of rebuilding trust in the organization. As for the trail, the HOA officially acknowledged in writing that it ran through my property under a public easement and that they had no authority over it. They removed all the unauthorized signs they'd posted over the years and consulted with me before doing any maintenance work. In return, I gave them permission to do basic maintenance like snow grooming and fallen tree removal, as long as they coordinated with me first. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it gets in rural Montana. I used Eagle Ridge Trail whenever I wanted, and I never had another problem with the HOA. Occasionally, I'd see residents from the development using the trail, and they'd wave or stop to chat. The hostility that had existed before was gone, replaced by a cautious friendliness. One day in late March, as the snow was starting to melt and spring was thinking about arriving, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up my driveway. It was Sharon Vance, the HOA board member who tried to mediate the original dispute. "Vincent, hi. Do you have a minute?" "Sure, come on in." She followed me into the cabin and I made coffee while we talked. "I wanted to thank you," Sharon said, "for coming to that meeting back in January and for testifying at Patricia's trial. I know it wasn't easy. Just telling the truth. I know. But you could have just taken your settlement and walked away. Instead, you helped us uncover years of fraud and corruption. A lot of people in the development are grateful, even if they don't know how to say it." "How's the HOA doing?" "Much better. The new management company is professional and transparent, and we've implemented new financial controls. We're actually functioning the way an HOA is supposed to function, maintaining property values and organizing community events, instead of being Patricia's personal fiefdom." "That's good to hear." Sharon hesitated, then pulled an envelope from her purse. "The HOA board wanted me to give you this. It's not much, but it's a small token of appreciation." Inside the envelope was a check for $2,000 and a letter signed by the entire board, thanking me for my role in uncovering the fraud and expressing their hope that we could maintain a good relationship going forward. "Sharon, you don't have to do this. We want to. And Vincent, if you ever need anything, or if you want to attend HOA meetings to weigh in on trail maintenance or other issues, you're always welcome. You may not be a member, but you're part of this community." After Sharon left, I sat on my porch with my coffee and looked out over the mountains. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of orange and pink. Eagle Ridge Trail wound through the forest below, a ribbon of white cutting through the trees. I thought about everything that had happened. The confrontation on the trail, the theft of my snow machine, the legal battle, the discovery of the fraud, the trial. It had been exhausting and stressful, but in the end, justice had been served. More importantly, I'd learned something about standing up for your rights. It would have been easier to just accept Patricia's authority, to pay her bogus fines and take the long way around. But I'd known she was wrong, and I'd refused to back down. That decision had cost me time and money, but it had also exposed a much larger pattern of corruption and helped dozens of families recover their stolen money. Sometimes doing the right thing is inconvenient. Sometimes it's expensive. Sometimes it means standing alone against people who claim to have authority, but it's still worth doing. I finished my coffee and went back inside to make dinner. Through the window, I could see the trail in the fading light, quiet and peaceful. My trail on my land, open to everyone who wanted to use it the way it was meant to be used. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The fight was over and I'd won. Not just the legal battle, but something more important. I defended my property, exposed corruption, and helped restore integrity to a community that had been losing its way. And the next morning, when I fired up my snow machine and headed down Eagle Ridge Trail into town, I did it with a clear conscience and a smile on my face. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody demanded fines or threatened seizures. I was just a guy riding his snow machine on a public trail that happened to cross his property, exactly the way it was supposed to be. The HOA had learned a hard lesson about authority and accountability. Patricia Henderson had learned an even harder lesson about the consequences of fraud and abuse of power. And I'd learned that sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, you don't just win for yourself, you win for everyone. As I rode down the trail, the cold wind in my face and the engine rumbling beneath me, I thought about all the other people out there dealing with overreaching HOAs and petty tyrants drunk on tiny amounts of power. I hoped my story would reach them somehow, would encourage them to stand their ground and demand accountability. Because at the end of the day, that's what this was really about. Not property lines or easements or legal technicalities, but the fundamental principle that authority has to be earned and exercised responsibly. Patricia Henderson had forgotten that, and it had cost her everything. I reached the end of the trail where it intersected with County Road 219, turned onto the plowed highway, and headed toward Whitefish. The morning sun was bright on the snow, and the sky was that impossible shade of blue you only get in Montana winters. It was a perfect day. Life was good. The trail was mine, and justice, for once, had actually prevailed.